Welcome, everyone. We are so thrilled that you are here with us this evening. As we just sort of get started, we have a warm-up to start prompting our thinking for our session, which is, what does empowerment look like to you? So if you can just type one word in the chat about what empowerment looks like to you, that would be great. And while you all are doing that, I will just introduce myself and have my colleagues introduce themselves. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Brianna White, and I head up the education department for the National Portrait Gallery. And I am joined by two dear colleagues who I'm excited to be sharing this workshop with. Sarah.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you, zooming in from Chicago. And I'm Sarah Alvarez, and I use she, her pronouns. And I am the Senior Director for Students and Educators at the Art Institute of Chicago, and really excited to be with you this evening. And I'll turn it to my colleague, Corinne.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here today. My name is Corinne Rose, and I am the Associate Director for Students and Educators, and I also prefer she, her pronouns.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I have to tell you, just as an aside, Sarah, Corinne, and I were so lucky to work together over the summer to create this program for Chicago Public Schools teachers. Because you all might know that the portraits of President Obama and the First Lady are currently touring the country right now. And the very first stop on this tour was to the Art Institute of Chicago. They've since moved on to Brooklyn, but Sarah, Corinne, and I had such a good time creating this program that we thought that we would bring it to NPG teachers who've participated in our programs in the past. So welcome again. We are all thrilled that you're here. Let's see. And the way that we're going to work the chat this evening is I'm going to take a little bit of time and engage with you all with these portraits. And then Sarah and Corinne are going to do the same thing with images from the Art Institute. But when the other of us is not talking, we'll be manning the chat. So I will be calling on them to help me, and they will also be calling on all of us. Some of the responses that I'm seeing in the chat are words like freedom, pride, independence, agency, strength, integrity. Are there others that I'm missing?
I see a couple of voice, I think. Confidence, a couple of confidence, opportunity.
Wonderful.
Integrity.
So hang on to all of these words as you're thinking about this idea of empowerment, because we will come back to them. So if you are somebody who wants to jot them down on a piece of paper, now is the time, or you can certainly scroll back through into the chat. So I'm going to move us right along and turn it over to Sarah.
Well, again, thanks, Brianna. And again, it's so wonderful to be with you all this evening. And I just want to do a quick little rundown of our objectives for our time together. We have 90 minutes, which is going to go by quickly. And we have a lot of things that we want to be able to share with you. So this set of objectives is basically like a bit of an agenda. And we're going to start by practicing strategies for analyzing or reading portraits. And of course, we're going to focus on the two Obama portraits as the kind of launching point for our conversation this evening. We'll then explore the portraits through the lenses of power and empowerment, sort of exploring the two different concepts. They're related to one another, but seeing them a little differently. Then we'll make some personal connections. And in fact, we'll probably be making personal connections to the portraits and the art of portraiture throughout, but we have a couple of activities that we think will help really focus our attention in that way. And then we want to learn and share with each other as educators, both in museums and in classrooms and other spaces, about how we can teach with the Obama portraits with our students. And lastly, we'll share some resources that we can't share all of in the course of this program, but we have a list of things that will help you take the ideas and content from tonight and hopefully go deeper into your own teaching. So we're excited to get started. And I think, Brianna, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Okay. So it feels like such a long time ago, but on February 12th of 2018, the Portrait Gallery unveiled the portraits of President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama, which were created by Kehinde Wiley and Amy Sherald, respectively. And the image that you see on the screen is from that unveiling. The Portrait Gallery is an institution that really focuses on the stories and the people that we tell throughout American history, and sort of central to that mission are certainly portraits of the presidents. But it wasn't until George H.W. Bush that we started commissioning portraits of the presidents as well as the first ladies. So we wanted to start with this image so you had a view of the subjects as well as the artists all together. And what we're going to really spend some time on really over the next 20 minutes is looking closely at portraiture, but also really starting to think about how we build our toolbox for how we look. So what I would like for you to do is spend just a little bit of time taking a close look at this portrait. And when you're ready to go ahead and add your initial observations that you have about this work into the chat. And when I say observations, I really do mean the physical things, the things that we can see in this image with our eyes. So often I like to say, start from the bottom, work your way to the top, look from side to side, look all around, and take in as many details as you can. So I'm seeing some shadows, color, depth. The subject is looking directly at us. There's light shining on his face, an old-fashioned chair. It feels sort of casual. The way that his hands are resting on his legs. We're getting into specifics about the flowers. So I've just read violets and chrysanthemums. Deborah mentioned sort of this lush greenery that we see. And please, Sarah and Corinne, I'm definitely not getting all of them. So if there's anything that's standing out to you, let me know.
Well,
no tie. Sorry, go ahead.
One of the first comments reflected on the fact that it's a non-traditional setting. And then there's a lot of comments about the flowers, the leaves, the natural details that make up that setting.
Someone mentioned there's a wedding ring, but no tie.
Okay, excellent. Michelle mentions a serious expression. Excellent.
A lot of attention to the chair too.
Right, how could you not? It definitely stands out in contrast with the foliage, the greenery, the beautiful flowers that we're seeing. So thank you for all of these observations. hang on to those. And I want to talk a little bit about Wiley's work, but also some of the symbolism that we see within this portrait. So one of the things that I love about Kehinde Wiley's work is that he is inspired by old master paintings. For those of you that have been to the portrait gallery, you know that we have that amazing LL Cool J portrait on view that references a John Singer Sargent portrait of John D. Rockefeller. And so Wiley is often thinking about these old master paintings, but what he does is he places people of color, contemporary people of color, into these traditional settings of these old master paintings. And he's really thinking about the stories that we tell in art history and bringing them together with contemporary culture to reframe that conversation about the art historical narrative. So that is, when you know Wiley's work, you can begin to, you really do start to know it, to pick out very specific stylistic choices that he makes. But one of the things that I love about this particular piece is that Wiley actually did not use any other portrait that came before to create this portrait of President Obama. And I just want to read this quote to you. And this quote will be in your resources that we give you at the end, the link. So this quote comes from President Obama and was at the unveiling. He said it at the unveiling of the portraits. He said, "Kehinde's art often takes ordinary people and elevates them, lifts them up and puts them in these fairly elaborate settings. His initial impulse was to also elevate me and put me in these settings with partridges, specters, thrones, and shift robes, and mounting me on horses. And I had to explain, I got enough political problems without you making me look like Napoleon. You gotta bring it down just a touch." And I just love that quote because it really does get at the difference, right, that we see in this portrait compared to portraits of past presidents, which we'll get to that idea in just a second. But I do just want to point out the symbols that are referenced in this portrait of President Obama. So the flowers are there for a reason. They're there to really tell us about the president's path to the Oval Office. So the chrysanthemum is the flower, the official flower of Chicago, where he began his political career. The jasmine evokes the Hawaii of his childhood. And I just saw that Ramona put the same thing into the chat. Thank you, Ramona. And then finally, the African blue lilies symbolize Obama's Kenyan heritage. And so we don't see, I think, what we might generally expect to see in a presidential portrait, but instead we see something completely different. So I would love to hear from all of you. When you think of portraits of the presidents, what do you think are the must-haves in those portraits? What do you think are the must-haves? When you think of any portrait of a president that you've seen in the past, what are those must-haves?
I'm seeing strength, the person himself, themselves, formality.
Dark background. Yeah.
Strong pose, a reflection of character, formal attire,
Serious.
symbols of power.
Excellent. Excellent.
The must-have prior to Obama was that they would have been white.
Right. I see brown skin. I see patterns and leaves. I see growth and vegetation and beautiful flowers, like you said.
So we have this idea, right, in our head about how a president should be portrayed. And I think that we've already very clearly said how this portrait differs from those other portraits, right? With the foliage, with sort of the engagement of President Obama with us as the viewer of the portrait. There is a little bit less of a formality here. It feels a little bit more casual. And his gaze is directly on us, right? As if we are about to have a conversation. And it does feel that way when you're seeing this portrait in a gallery setting as well. So since we are really focusing in on this idea of empowerment and power for our workshop this evening, I guess, what references of power do we see in this portrait of President Obama? What references of power do we see? Right in a row, 3 people, the black suit. Okay. And then his hands, his gaze. Oh, thank you, Ramona. That is it's a very sweet comment. Right, the pose.
The white shirt
Okay. And his white collar, yeah.
and his size in the frame.
Yeah, he's taking up space, right? Okay. So
Even when the space is trying to overcrowd him a little bit, like you could see the overgrowth even trying to come through.
Yeah.
And imagine it coming out of the chair, out and onto the chair and spilling onto him like it is on his feet.
Right.
And it kind of
Right.
makes him also feel grounded.
You're absolutely right. And I think that, and that's one of the really lovely things I think about the contrast, right, between the green foliage and the black suit, is it allows us to really continually focus on Obama, even though we have this foliage sort of crowding, like, on his arm, in front of his leg. Excellent. So hang on to these ideas, right? That how we evoke power and how we show power isn't just one way. It isn't just with sort of the typical trappings of the Oval Office that we might think of. It can be seen in a variety of ways. So these are what we call at the Portrait Gallery the elements of portrayal. And these are the visual elements in a portrait that you need to tease out if you want to tell the story of that particular image. And, it is certainly true that some elements lend themselves to some portraits more than others do. But I think that we can safely say with this particular portrait that we could have a conversation about all 10 of these elements. So just keep those expression, hairstyle, pose and posture, clothing, setting, objects, medium scale, the style of the portrait, as well as color. And what I'd like to do is practice a little bit more of that close looking now that we have these specific elements with the portrait of Michelle Obama. So I'm going to ask the same question that I asked last time, which is, what are your initial observations with this portrait? What are the first things that you notice visually about this image? And please share your ideas in the chat.
The dress, the background, the skin tone, the colors.
Long skirt, sky blue, gray skin. Her gaze.
her height, her arms. A couple people have noted her arms, the gracefulness, the openness.
The geometric designs on the skirt.
The pops of color.
Mhm. Oh, an interesting comparison between the two portraits, that the pattern here is in her dress, whereas the pattern was really in the background, the foliage in the Barack Obama portrait.
That's an excellent observation. And one of the first that I noticed as people were starting to respond was something similar to President Obama's portrait, in that she takes up space in this piece, just like he does in his portrait. Excellent.
Mhm.
Wonderful. Keep those observations coming in. And while you do, I want to tell you a little bit about Cheryl's process, as well as, I guess, really the why of why she creates the work that that she specifically does. And I just noticed the nails, which is also a really great comment, because they tie so nicely in to the that sort of robin's egg blue color of the background. It's beautiful. So so Cheryl, she documents the contemporary African-American experience in this country through, I would say, arresting figurative paintings. She engages with the history of photography in portraiture. And that becomes really important because she's trying to tease out unexpected narratives. And she's inviting us as viewers of her works into a more complex debate about accepted notions of race and representation, and to situate Black heritage centrally in American art. And when I say the history of photography in portraiture, what I mean by that is, and I'm going to read a quote from Amy Sherrill because she says it best. I grew up looking at photographs. My mom had a place where she kept all of her photographs, and I would pull them out, and I never got tired of staring at these gray pictures of my grandmother. Now, Cheryl has said that those pictures helped her find herself and her Black identity in a history of art that had largely left her out. And so I often have conversations with visitors in the museum, with teachers and with students about why the grayscale, or what's called engrisé. And it really is referencing this history of photography in portraiture, as well as this idea that works on paper as a whole and photography specifically really democratized portraiture, right? It was sort of this moment where more and more and more people could have portraits created. And so there was this opportunity to be able to see yourself in this particular way. Okay, so I'm going to move us on a little bit. And we're so fortunate to be able to think about these three works together. And the two pieces that are on the right-hand side are from the Art Institute of Chicago. One is a work of art by Piet Mondrian, and then one is a quilt from a quilter in Gee's Bend, Alabama. So there are a lot of, I think, stories, right, that Amy Sherrill is trying to tell with this particular portrait of Michelle Obama. The dress was a creation from the designer Michelle Smith for her label Millie. And at the unveiling, Cheryl spoke about how the dress reminded her of a quilt from Gee's Bend. But also she noted the colors and shapes that were reminiscent in a Piet Mondrian artwork. So it's really lovely to be able to see these three pieces on screen together, because I think that it could provide a lot of opportunities for comparison and contrasting, as well as self-discovery with your students to see if they can begin to make those connections between these inspiration pieces. So now that I've been talking a lot about this portrait, I do want to turn it back to you and ask, when you have the context of a portrait, what I always like to call the backstory of a portrait, does it challenge your understanding of the image, or does it extend? And so it's a question I pose to all of you. How does having this context either challenge or extend our understanding of the portrait of the First Lady? I guess, and a follow-up question would be, and in what way? It extends, deepens, grows. And her gown definitely takes me back, right, to thinking about quilts as art in history and stories.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We do focus on the gray skin, and it is important to know what the artist was thinking in this case. Right, and it's an opportunity to talk about art history, quilts, the Underground Railroad. Excellent. Wonderful. Well, definitely keep those comments coming. And before I turn it over to my colleagues, I'm wondering if we can connect any of the words that you all wrote in at the beginning of our workshop about empowerment to this particular portrait. So some of those words that I was thinking about, really the first one was agency. When I see this piece, I automatically think agency. What other words might stand out to you as you look at this portrait of Michelle Obama? Confidence, poise.
Cool.
Cool.
Principled. Exquisite. Gaze.
Excellent. Strength. Excellent. Fearless.
Wise.
Wise.
So equal to all.
Mm-hmm.
And then independence.
Ready.
Excellent. And confident. More independence. Ooh, unapologetic. Smart, feminine. I love that. Excellent. And grounded. Do keep adding those to the chat as well. And as I turn things over, just a reminder that we will continue to use these elements throughout the program. And it really does provide the foundation by which we engage with portraiture. And, these visual clues really allow us to springboard into a wealth of conversations, right? About social studies, about English language arts, visual arts, as well as many other content areas. And you can pick and choose, right? Some of these might not work well with other artworks, but some of them might work incredibly well with other artworks as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Great. Well, there's one question in the chat that just wanted to respond to about the dimensions of the two portraits, and they are very similarly sized. I'm not sure without double checking if one is slightly larger than the other. Brianna, do you know?
So President Obama's portrait is slightly taller than Michelle Obama's portrait, but hers is slightly wider than his.
Okay, okay, great. So we have talked and looked very closely at the two portraits of President Obama and Michelle Obama and gotten to know them and familiarized ourselves with the details of those portraits and really thought about the elements of portraits that we can look for in other types of portraits, presidential or otherwise. And we want to use that as a jumping off point to think about, to go a bit deeper and to really think about different lenses or topics or themes that we can pursue in looking at portraits. And there are all sorts of portraits out there, things that are actually depicting a person in a setting. But then there are also images that we would call a portrait maybe and don't even have the person. They just have the belongings of the person, but they sort of tell a story about that person. And so we, given the nature of these two portraits, we wanted to go in a couple of specific directions. And as we said at the beginning of the program, really think about these two lenses of power and empowerment. And I want to spend a little time with you focusing on the former, which is power. Brianna asked you to talk a little bit about your own assumptions or expectations of what a presidential portrait might look like. And it's really helpful for us to actually look at a few. And we'll look at these three on the screen together for a few moments. And then we'll also bring back in the portrait of Barack Obama and see how they all kind of compare together. But I want to spend a minute just looking at these three portraits. Only one of them is in the Art Institute's collection, although it's a model for something that is much closer to all of you in the DC area. And the other two are in, one is actually at the National Portrait Gallery, that of Theodore Roosevelt, and the one in the center is at the National Gallery of Art. So they are found in different collections. And I imagine that looking at them, the individuals are actually familiar to you. And this tells us something already. This tells us that these presidential images are repeated over and over again, whether it be in money or portraits or other places. And we've seen them repeatedly, which tells us already that they have a position of power. So we're coming to these portraits expecting them to tell us about power, expecting them to convey a sense of power. And so I'm curious if we look at them and if you can continue to use the chat as wonderfully as you have. I've been really enjoying reading everybody's thoughtful and observant comments. Continue to do so and just look at these three images. I'll be quiet for about 30 seconds or so and just tell me, where do you see power here? What kinds of things do you see in these images? And I'm just going to say across from left to right, just to make sure we're all making sure we're looking at the same fellows that we think we are, that we have Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, and Theodore Roosevelt here, left to right. So what are we seeing? Okay. Lincoln is on a throne. It's big and solid. Only rich people appear in portraits, and it's bronze, which costs money. Yeah. There's gold ornate furniture. And I'm just going to stop there for a second. I know there's lots more portraits or comments, and I'll catch up in a moment. But we see in the furnishings in them, at least in Washington and Lincoln, we see this monumental, very clear and identifiably sort of grand furniture. So Lincoln sits in an almost throne-like seat. And George Washington stands in a room with gilt furniture. There's an enormous pair of columns behind him and velvet drapery, and the clothing he's wearing himself is velvet and shows an air of wealth and refinement to it. Absolutely. I'm sure I've missed a lot of things. I'm just kind of taking a peek back here at the pose. I saw something about expression, and they all have a particular expression on their face. They're not all exactly the same, but they're quite serious in the way that they are looking out. Not necessarily all looking at us either. A number of you commented about the President Obama portrait, that he was actually looking and engaging us as viewers, and we don't always see that in these images here. Corinne or Brianna, things I've missed that you want to surface?
I see the comment that we know that Roosevelt is a man of nature. So he has his riding crop and his gloves moved as if he just came in from a ride. Right.
Yes, exactly. Just hopped off his horse and came on in and sat down and sat for this portrait. He's wearing a cape as well, which has a sort of silken or satiny interior. It's a little hard to tell, I'm sure, in the slideshow, but it's a sort of deep purple, very luxurious color.
And I want to revisit a comment that was made previously when we were thinking about what our expectations of presidential portraits would be. Somebody had mentioned dark backgrounds, right? And that's exactly what we see with Theodore Roosevelt's.
Right. And someone else mentions the rainbow. So let me tell you a little bit, which is a particular aspect of the background in the George Washington portrait. Let me tell you just a little bit about each of them here. So the Abraham Lincoln is a modeled version. It's much smaller than the version that is at the Lincoln Memorial, but it was created by Daniel Chester French, who was the artist the sculptor who created the version that is at the memorial in 1916. And there were a number of these smaller scale versions that were sold as a way to kind of, frankly, make a little bit more money off of the commission. And you see them in museums, a number of different museums. He is seated on this kind of throne-like chair. There's actually an American flag around the back of the chair, which is a little hard to make out. And there are fasces, these sort of bundles of sticks on the arms of the chair. And I'm not sure if anybody picked it out or knows, but the same bundle of sticks or branches is actually on the legs of the chair and on the table in the portrait of George Washington as well. These are ancient Roman symbols of power and governance. So they have a legacy or a history of speaking to power in a very particular way. And there's a quote that I want to read you by Daniel Chester French about this image of Abraham Lincoln. And he said, "What I wanted to convey was the mental and physical strength of the great president and his confidence in his ability. If any of this gets over, I think it's probably as much due to the whole pose of the figure and particularly to the action of the hands as to the expression of the face." And I think that's noteworthy that he's paying a lot of attention to the hands here. And a lot of us made note of the importance of the hands in the Barack Obama portrait as well. So recognizing that the hands have an ability to convey symbolism in the portrait is notable. The Washington portrait is so loaded with symbolism that we would be here for an hour and a half just talking about all the symbolism in that portrait. But it's a substantially sized portrait, and it's really a portrait. It's from 1796, so towards the end of his presidency, created by Gilbert Stuart, and really an image to convey the promise of the new republic. But it is completely entrenched or sort of like laden with all of these tropes of European portraits of nobility and men and women of status, wealth, and stature. So he has this open pose, which goes back to Roman portraiture. He has this fine dress. We see him pointing to books and attributes of learning, in this case, the laws of the new nation. But that rainbow in the back is also suggesting that this is not the way it has been, but it is the sort of dawn of a new era that he's announcing in this portrait. And then what we have of Theodore Roosevelt is not necessarily an official portrait per se, but is one of a number of portraits. In fact, all of these presidents there are a number of portraits made of them, not just one. But he has chosen intentionally in this portrait to be dressed in more casual attire, which still seems rather formal to all of us today. But in 1908, when the original portrait was made, this is a copy from the 1940s, but the original portrait that's in the New York Historical Society, I believe, shows him in what would have been for him more casual dress. And so we see him directly looking out at us in this more casual attire. And he was a naturalist, he was a conservationist, but and that does speak to that aspect of his leadership in a way, but he also could choose to be shown in this more informal way. So I'm curious, I want to read to you a quote from Kehinde Wiley, and we can go to the next slide, Brianna. And bringing the portrait of Barack Obama back into the mix. Kehinde Wiley says, there was no template here to be provoking and groundbreaking. A lot of faith was involved. We tried to concentrate on how we would work symbolically to emerge from the past into a 21st century moment, suggesting what it means to embody power today. And so even though Kehinde Wiley, we know, as Brianna talked about, and some of you may know his work quite well already, he's sort of remixing these images of power from the past. He's also trying to break free of them in a lot of ways. And so thinking about these past presidential portraits, and I'm curious if you have any new thoughts about how he has moved this idea of a presidential portrait forward in his approach to creating the portrait of Barack Obama. I'm curious, any thoughts? Okay, so the growth from the background. So there's that idea of a dawn of a new day with the rainbow in the Washington portrait, but this is a wholly different approach to doing that. Absolutely. Garden of Eden idea and reflecting the natural world. Yeah, there's actually an interesting detail in again, there's so many things in the George Washington portrait, but there's the inkwell on the table is actually in the shape of Noah's Ark. So again, this idea of kind of weathering a storm being the revolution and this new era. So it is interesting that some of these ideas get repeated, but the way they're represented is wholly new. It reflects change. The man himself breaks the mold. Yeah. And the chair is a throwback to tradition. Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a sense of being kind of within a line, obviously, of many presidents, but making a real break. And so having a reference to that line or that background is one thing, and then really making sure it's clear about that that new era or that break from the past. Oh, we've got a reference to Las Meninas. Yeah. Looking at the future and expecting much. And he made it okay to embrace his heritage. Yeah, it's interesting because I'm just going to speak to Washington for a minute. He's kind of rejecting certain things of the past in a way, but he's also completely entrenched in these symbols of European portraiture at the same time. So no fear of forging a new vision. Well, I hope you continue to have thoughts about this, but I think it is a really engaging exercise to pair the Obama portrait with these other presidential portraits and really see how it forges a new direction and a new path, and how that reflects not only portraiture and traditions of portraiture, but also potentially the historical context of these different presidents. I'm going to turn things over to Corinne. And as I said, we're taking a couple of different paths here, and the first was to really think about images of power in the context of presidential portraits. But portraits also have this ability to empower, to really suggest that we really can find and celebrate power in places that maybe we haven't before, and can really be a tool of empowerment. And so we want to shift gears a little bit and talk about that. So Corinne?
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so we have 4 images here from the collection of the Art Institute of Chicago. We do have links provided in the next slide, so you'll get that later. And Sarah mentioned the two words power and empowerment. And I want to kind of ground us in a little definition there. So when we talk about power, we're generally talking about control or power over other people, right? And empowerment tends to suggest more being strong and confident in our own life and claiming our own rights, right? So even though those words seem very connected, there's a lot of nuance there. So let's look at what we see here. We have a little thumbnail of Michelle Obama, and we spoke earlier about how we see power and empowerment in her image here. And I want us to think about how power or empowerment shows in the other four images here. So, and I want us to think, you know, the details always tell the story, and we can read the details just like we can read a written text. So I want you to say where you see power or empowerment and how it shows. So where do we see it? So what feels empowering and how does it show? Okay, so just take a minute, use the chat, and start to note your observations, please.
Corinne, I noticed right away this idea of the gaze, right, directly at the viewer in 4 of 5 portraits.
Good.
Now, one of the things I think.
Well, I saw earlier a comment that power can also mean having power over one's own life. So that's definitely true. So those two words, there's a lot of play and nuance there. So I'm seeing body language all around. So body language in each one. The poses suggest empowerment, the gaze, feeling of comfort. Okay, let's come back to some of our elements of portrayal here. If we think about maybe artistic style and color, when we're looking at, let's say the image of the woman here in the center bottom, how does artistic style and color suggest power in this work here or empowerment? Geometric shapes, strong lines. It's vibrant. That's right. It's the brightness of this just kind of leaps off the paper. So the direction of her gaze, great. So we're coming back to pose, that her eyes are lifted up. The upraised arm and fist in this young woman over here on the side. So hairstyle, okay, yeah, that this woman has this, you know, proud, bold hairstyle here. We see earrings, perspective. Broken lines and shapes which still create a clear figure. Everything is big, okay? We're coming back to that size and scale, right? Size and scale in the frame. Her closed mouth. Okay, how about this young man over here on the right? Where do we see power or empowerment there? Anyone? How about if we come back again to our elements of portrayal, does anybody see clothing here? So this boy sees confidence. How does that confidence show? He's cooler in the moment than I will ever be, right? If he could speak to us, don't you think he wants to look cool, right? He's completely comfortable. He's just being.
It's the sunglasses.
Right? Yeah. He seems very, very confident in his choice of clothing and his body language. So again, all of these elements of portrayal coming together to show power and empowerment. The relaxed pose, yeah, he seems to own the place, right? He's young, but he seems very, very comfortable. He's owning it. Wonderful. Does anyone else have something to say about how about the top image here? You may recognize this figure, right? In this kind of the gold frame at top.
There were a couple comments suggesting a recognition of the figure, and someone mentioned that they had been thinking about Douglas when Brianna was talking earlier about photography and as a democratizing medium. So
okay, good. I missed that. Yeah. So Frederick Douglass, that's right. So he's a known figure, a little bit different than some of the other folks that we see here. Very important person in the history of our country. But how does the confidence show in what we see here? So if we think about hairstyle, pose, posture, clothing, setting, medium, scale, he's obviously prepared. So, okay, so this is a photograph, but he seems to have, you know, arranged himself for the camera, right? He's aware of how his pose, his serious expression, right? He could have, he's choosing how to show himself to the camera, right? And he's looking focused, serious, his clothing and the angle, very good. Any other observations here? Okay, so the viewer is physically lower. So that's important as well. Where are their eyes going, right? What is their gaze and how are we positioned? So like this, the woman at the bottom here in the center, we're looking up at her, right? Our gaze is looking up at her, which, you know, that matters. It suggests that she is bigger than us, that she is important. So Frederick Douglass, there's still work to do and he must represent progress. Okay, wonderful comments. So let's, Brianna, you can go to the, Frederick Douglass has an opinion about what he sees. That's right. Okay, very good. Okay, so here we are in the next slide. We have more information here. So we've already identified Frederick Douglass here. And so as we did earlier, when we added in information about the artists and the presidential portraits, you know, context matters. We want to talk about what we observe and the details that we can see as well as the context. So this image of Frederick Douglass here, Douglass, of course, was a noted scholar, orator, and abolitionist. He was also a brilliant manager of his own public image. So he knew that this image and many others he commissioned, looking determined and accomplished, might influence those involved in the movement to end slavery. So we have a formerly enslaved person here wearing a suit, right? And with a very particular look on his face, right? So he's crafting his own image here. The image on left is by an Indian photographer named Gauri Gill. And she made this image during a workshop at a girls' festival where the girls were asked to portray themselves as they are. So how they see themselves or to invent new selves for the camera. The image at bottom here, this is a painting made in 1970 by an artist named Nelson Stevens. And Stevens was a member of a group called Afro Cobra, which was a Chicago-based group of Black artists whose shared aim was to develop their own aesthetic in the visual arts in order to empower Black communities. And this, the image at right of the young man in front of the movie theater, this is by Dawood Bey, who lives here in Chicago. And this is from his very first body of work, a series called Harlem, USA. And throughout his career, Dawood Bey has depicted people of color and their communities and histories that have in large part been underrepresented or misrepresented in art and media. Okay, thank you. And next slide, Brianna. So as we move into our next section, and as I turn this over to Brianna, I just wanted to read this quote here. So this is Michelle Obama. She says, "These are portraits of me and Barack. Oh, there are portraits of me and Barack now hanging in the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, a fact that humbles us both. The paintings are lovely, but what matters most is that they are there for young people to see. That our faces help dismantle the perception that in order to be enshrined in history, you have to look a certain way. If we belong, then so too can many others." Okay, and I'll turn it over to Brianna now.
Thanks, Corinne. So we're gonna, we've spent about, the last hour talking about pieces in each of our respective collections, thinking about this idea of power, of empowerment. And now we're going to switch gears a little bit and really start to hand things over to you all to start thinking about connections and connections in a lot of different ways. We're going to think about connections among the artworks. We're also going to start to think about ways that you might be able to use these artworks in the classroom. And that will help us, that'll round out our time together over about the next half hour, maybe a little bit less. So to sort of springboard us into this next conversation, I'm wondering what sorts of connections can you all begin to make between these three ideas that we've really been focusing in on? Storytelling, right? Every artwork, every portrait is going to tell some sort of story. We've talked a lot about this idea of contextual information and the backstory. What sorts of connections can you make between the storytelling, the likeness, the portrait itself, and this theme that we've been exploring over the past hour of power and empowerment? So what sorts of connections can you make really among these three ideas? And as you all are typing and hitting enter, I've loved to continue to see your observations about the works from the Art Institute. They've been great. Especially Frederick Douglass's expression, which reads, "Don't mess with me."
I'm seeing a post here, or a comment. I'm reading Lies My Teacher Taught Me, and it tells about how we created historic storytelling about our past. And I think that really gets at this idea of, who's telling the story, who's creating the portraits, whose portraits are created. And I see that coming through, starting to come through in that comment, and others as well.
Right. And I was thinking, as you were saying that, I was thinking about, again, this idea of agency, right? And ensuring that we do have control over our own story, right? And the story that we are portraying out to the world. And with agency, I think that ties really nicely into power.
Yeah, portraits tell a story about how we want to be seen. It's one of the comments here. Yep. And power reflected in history and identity. But storytelling can give or take away power through art.
Okay. That's a pretty deep comment.
Yeah, definitely.
So this idea, right, of putting all of those elements together, right? The elements of portrayal coming together to tell a story.
Capturing someone versus letting them have control and autonomy, how over how they are portrayed is empowering.
Right. Right. That's an excellent observation. We have the power to tell our story. Oh, Alicia talks about a common theme that she sees in these three ideas of storytelling, portraiture, and power, and that is choice.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've looked at all of the portraits that we've shown you use portraiture as in a way to celebrate and they seem positive, I guess, is the way I would characterize them. But sometimes that's at the expense of others. It can be in a portrait, it can be in other kinds of artworks too. And so that question of choice, I think, is whose choice? What do we actually see in the portrait, and what is not shown, what is not chosen to be shown, or what's not visible to us is part of that too. These are great comments that kind of get us to think about the complexities of these artworks.
Right, because we often talk at the portrait gallery about how portraits both reveal and conceal, right? You know, when we think about this idea of choice, how we want to be seen, how we don't want to be seen, who we really are versus, you know, what we show to the world.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, some of the images that Corinne showed us were created at a time, and unfortunately, we're still in that time where there's a need to counter negative and non-celebratory images, so I think that is that context. Your question earlier, Brianna, about what is it, having the background context, how does that help us understand some of that?
Yeah. And Angela is writing about how she's thinking about how pictures are used in media to tell a story. Yeah. And whether or not the subject has control over what story is told. And others are agreeing with that statement. Mm-hmm. And Susan is pushing us forward into a question that we're going to ask in just a little bit, right? Which is this idea of, you know, well, how can you use these images in the classroom? So before I forget, and before, you know, the chat sort of just keeps getting longer and longer, I'll just call that out, which is to have students try and match quotes. Perhaps by the individuals that are represented in the portraits with their own portraits. I love that idea.
And Ramona's comment here about presenting a portrait or a painting or a photograph as a text to which we can apply rhetorical reading skills is something we definitely talk a lot about here at the Art Institute and with the teachers that we work with here locally, and recognizing that that kind of visual literacy is so important, and portraits are a great material or great subject to work with in that regard. Absolutely.
And I think too that this idea of right, being able to read portraits or read artwork actually is a really nice segue into being able to read text. I mean, the idea is the same. I mean, you're looking for details. It's just the kinds of details that you're looking for are a little bit different. But those two ideas, they're you know, they're definitely going hand in hand. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And last comment about more non-traditional portraits at the portrait gallery. I mean, I would definitely say that's the case. You know, as we shift into you know, the end of really the latter half of the 20th century and moving into the 21st century, you know, the representations that we have on view are definitely a sign of their times, if you will. So I think that, you know, the artists who are creating portraits of presidents, depending on, you know, what their medium and what their style is, it can very much reflect the moment that the president is president. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I am going to move us right along. Thank you for all of these really wonderful comments. And I'm gonna turn things back over to Corinne.
Okay, thank you, Brianna. So we've talked a lot about agency and power, empowerment, and we're going to use a technique called word waterfall. So we're going to give you a minute to think and type, but we are going to wait to post responses until I say go. Okay, you're going to have about 1 minute. And so this is our question here right now. Again, you have the power to tell your story through a portrait. And what would you like your portrait to show? So take about 1 minute. You can think and type in the chat, but don't press chat yet. Okay.
Mhm. Nice idea, Angela. Well,
Mhm.
just, and that can work with more than just portraits too.
Mhm.
Okay, what would you like your portrait to show? Okay, about 10 more seconds, finish up your comments. And when I say go, you can hit the return and we'll see all of these comments come cascading down. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Oh, cool.
Wow, creativity, passion. That I'm stronger than I look. Fascination with the world. Color, creativity,
Independent.
boldness, the work I've done.
And seeing
And-
independence and power.
I love Erin's response of just the word light. That's pretty awesome.
I see a
And-
comment on, I don't think I would like my portrait on anyone's wall. So that's maybe a different question, right? Where would it hang? And maybe it's just for you, right? Maybe it's made for, some portraits can be made for private use for yourself or for your family. But I'd like it to reflect my values, my family, my teaching, job, environment, activism, love for questioning others.
Right, and I love that that some of you are really thinking about these, these adjectives and descriptors, right, to think about your portrait. And then others of you are thinking very concretely about the actual like stuff, right, that you want. And I'm sure that you're thinking about what those things, what symbolism they might convey about you.
Right. So that's the next step, right? Is you can think about how would you show that, right? That's the questions. How would you make that show? And that's a question for our students as well, is how could you show that, right? Our students often don't think about how they appear in a photograph other than maybe, sometimes mimicking what they see in other portraits. So wonderful, really great responses.
My portrait would be unfinished.
It would be unfinished.
Ditto to that. Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Brianna now.
All right.
Thank
I
you.
think that's actually,
Oh.
nope,
Oh.
one back one.
Sorry.
That's okay. It's all right.
Turning it over to
I'm gonna-
Sarah.
Yeah, I'm gonna hop in here.
Mhm.
I mean, I think some ideas have already started to surface and we've already shared, just even in thinking about responses to some of your ideas in the chat. I think the wheels are starting to spin. But I'm curious if, and we are curious if you're having ideas about how you might bring these portraits, whether it's the Obama portraits by themselves or some of the other portraits that we shared, into your classroom or into your teaching, and how you are thinking about, taking ideas away from our time together today and sharing them with your students. Let's see, Ramona, I like that differentiation strategy, give them the option of choosing one they like and replicate for themselves or describe their own. Yeah, absolutely. I think, the idea of inspiration is really important, which is that, all the artists that we looked at today, in some cases, we didn't talk as much about the artists, some of the presidential portraits, as we did about the subjects. But those artists are making choices, as well as the sitters that are being portrayed, about how they're being portrayed. And every time we look at works of art, they provide us with inspiration about the kinds of choices that we can make, either in the way we're portrayed or the way that we portray the world around us in our own artwork. So I think thinking about looking at works of art as inspiration points is really great. Teaching an RTL, our RTI, which I'm class, I'm sorry if I missaid that or misspoke. I'm allowed a lot more freedom. I'd like to use these to introduce units. I'd like to them to select portraits that portray an aspect of their reading. Absolutely. I think we can often use images just as conversation starters because they engage our senses so directly. We immediately respond to colors, shapes, forms, texture, sometimes, and other elements of art, and they can really prompt our thinking, connections, conversation. So as an icebreaker or an opener to anything you're doing, reading or other kind of unit, it's a great idea. Introducing each other the first week of school, absolutely, through portraiture. Oh, someone's finishing a Mondrian project, how appropriate. That's you, Caroline. I moved them through organic to geometric design ideas and now show them Michelle's portrait. Make observations about what they learned about Mondrian and show them the quilt and have them make observations. Great, love that.
A comment about selfie culture.
Absolutely.
So asking them to really slow down and think about what it is that they're showing or they want to show.
Yep. Using a portrait as a prompt for storytelling. Absolutely.
And Nakia is mentioning that this is the perfect opportunity to connect big ideas to real world context.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
Deborah commenting on diving deep into a portrait as a writing prompt. So, so rich, right? You know, what right from the point of view of this character of this painting, you know, have a conversation between two characters is one that we've had before. Have two paintings talk to each other, right? It's really rich. And point to the details to give evidence.
Yeah, I'm seeing this, Joy Hatcher, your comment about social studies and visual literacy and visual sources. Yeah, we do at the Art Institute, we do a lot of work with works of art as primary sources and thinking about the way that it can open up inquiry and thinking through speaking, writing, illustrating, reading, listening, and how to artworks open up that process of inquiry in the social studies context. Absolutely. That's fantastic. Let's see, activity where they take various selfies of themselves and journal about how each photo is changed and how diction and syntax is impacted by angles, cropping, outfit choices. That's great. Yeah, sort of thinking about these different languages, the visual language and the written language and spoken language and the sort of way to use one to think about another. Yes, another shout out for inquiry. Absolutely.
I see a comment on the importance of symbols, and that's one that cuts across both visual imagery and written text, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Symbols, breaking it down.
And symbols, I mean, go back to the George Washington portrait. Symbolism is so contextual. And so it's really thinking about how can we look at something that we see as sometimes think as a sort of universal symbol, but in fact is understood in nuanced ways in different moments in different contexts. And portraits can be a great way to do that. Thinking about the whole body. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Corinne.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about people in advertising images and selling items. So there definitely you can jump into, you know, who made this image and for what purpose? Why was it made, right? And what is its impact on me? Yep,
absolutely. Which can lead you into even propaganda and thinking about. Yep. Absolutely. And some portraits very much sit in, especially presidential portraits or portraits of leadership and governance and power in that regard, in a political sense, can very much sit in the realm of propaganda and thinking about the impact in that regard. I love this comment from Susan too about thinking about the whole body in portraiture as opposed to just the bust. And so what part of the body is shown and why, again, takes us back to thinking about choices that are made and the impact of those choices. In the case of the Obama portraits, it was really a number of you really connected with this idea that they occupied space, that there was that was such an important part of how you understood and responded to the image, and their full bodies were in the portraits. So yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope that you have many, many more ideas that come to you. And we can take more if you have some thoughts. But we wanted this opportunity today to give each of you maybe some almost like sentence starters. to look at these portraits, these two portraits of Barack and Michelle Obama, and to get to know them, familiarize yourself with them more, but then to think about all the different directions that we can go with them as learners, both ourselves as learners, as well as for the learners that we engage with in classrooms and museums and all the other spaces in which we do. So hopefully this was, succeeded in that goal. It's been such an honor to be able to collaborate with Brianna and come from Zoom in from Chicago and spend this time with all of you. We know that people come and see the collection in Chicago frequently, but we don't often get to talk to teachers so far afield across the country. So this was a real treat for us today. And you just inspired me. I don't want to speak for, I'm sure I speak for Corinne and Brianna, but I don't want to put words in their mouths, but I feel very inspired through all of your thoughtfulness, your creativity, your responsiveness and engagement with our conversation today. You have on the screen here all of our contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Brianna also put a link to the slideshow in the chat so that you can see all of the images. There are links to the images to the Art Institute's website, to whichever museum in which they reside. And then there's a document link here down at the bottom, which has the quotes we gave you. It has other kinds of teaching resources and other materials that will hopefully answer every question that you're thinking that you might have. But if others come up, please reach out. I'm seeing lots of comments. Oh, Buffalo Grove shout out. Well, that's great. Okay. Fantastic. For those who are like, what is Buffalo Grove? It's a suburb here in Chicago. So, oh, we're glad to hear that you miss Chicago. Please come and visit us. The question or request to post the link again. Brianna, do you mind sharing it one more time in the chat?
So I'm putting the PowerPoint back into the chat again. If you are not able to open it via the chat, I also included my email address in the chat, but it's on the screen. Do send me an email and I will email it to you as well. And the resources link that's on the screen will be in that email that I send to you all. There have been some really wonderful comments along the way. What a treat it has been to bring two different collections together. We succeeded in helping a teacher take their mind off of grading. So that's always a positive. Lots of thanks all around. And we are so appreciative of all of you and taking time on a Wednesday afternoon, evening, depending on where you are, to spend it with us. And a special thank you to Corinne and Sarah. Thank you. I appreciate both of you, and I'm glad we were able to do this again. Claudine, the link will be in the PowerPoint itself. And if you can't, if you're unable to open it, just send me an email, which I'm including my email address in the chat. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening.
Be well. Hope the rest of your day, evening, week, and this school year is a success for all of you. We know teachers are doing all the things, and we're honored to have this time with you and to learn together with you, and wish you all the best.